report. Let's broaden our analysis and bring in Clara Volintiru, who's in Bucharest, Regional Director of the Black Sea Trust of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Clara, it's a pleasure to have you here in France 24. This election is important for so many reasons, but can I start by asking you your sense of how and why this has become such a vital vote?
Listen, the region is boiling, and as everything is unfolding across the eastern frontier of the European Union, of Europe, of the transatlantic world, of course it is important to have stability, security, and to count on your allies in a country like Romania. Now, Romania has always had a very steady foreign policy agenda, very much aligned with the transatlantic partners, with its international allies, and having a question mark over how the foreign policy agenda of Romania would look like after the presidential final in 2 weeks from now is a worrisome news for the current turmoils across Europe and America.
Indeed, there are so many questions. I mean, what happens to support for Ukraine, for instance, if Simion is elected?
It is, I think, too early to tell because the presidential candidate, George Simion, has not been very specific on his foreign policy stance. From an electoral point of view, he has tried to rally nationalistic votes, which have been responding to claims such as we do not want to give more advantages to Ukrainian refugees than to our own citizens. We do not take for granted the fact that our citizens in Ukraine have been, let's say, marginalized by the Ukrainian authorities. So these were messages that Simion has sent to his electorate, both in Romania and abroad. But these are, for the moment, electoral messages. From a policy point of view, I think even if he does get into Cotroceni as the president of Romania, he will be very much aligned with his European partners and, as far as we can tell, very much inclined to align himself with the presidential agenda of Donald Trump.
Indeed, and that's interesting because it seems to be a contradiction because Trump in some ways will be, I suppose, anti-Europe, but in terms of the EU and that kind of structure. But what we have here is Simion, who perhaps would not want to take Romania out of that because Romania would need the protection of being in the EU.
Of course, the advantages that Romania has had as a member of the European Union have been enormous. And the majority of the Romanian population is perfectly aware of that. I think we cannot necessarily put an equal sign between the fact that there has been a very strong support for a nationalistic agenda in these elections, and as far as we can tell also in the November elections. But at the same time, there isn't necessarily an anti-European sentiment or anti-European backlash. I think much of the rhetoric that we hear from George Simion and other nationalistic populist leaders is that we want to have a better positioning within the European Union, much like Viktor Orban in that respect.
Is the common factor this fear of foreigners, this demonization of immigrants? Is that one of the common factors between all these leaders you've mentioned?
No. In the Romanian case, there is no real support for any anti-immigrationist agenda. There has been a steady inflow of foreign workers, non-European workers in Romania, and they have been assimilated quite well. The Ukrainian migrants and refugees have been assimilated very well. But the fear that does prevail in support of these Ukraine narratives, let's say, is actually the fear of war. And that's common with Moldova or Georgia, where people that have been invaded by Russia before have had that historical sense of fear and lack of security. And that is what it is being exploited here. We do not want to be dragged into another war. And this is the message that is more pervasive across the Romanian society than the anti-immigrationist policy.
I hear what you're saying, Clara. You mentioned Moldova. Simion's party is campaigning on, I think the word they're using is reintegrating Moldova into Romania. But of course, Moldova's been independent since 1991. So it might if it happens, add up to an annexation, all that is a bridge to be crossed, of course. But what he wants is to bring Moldova into Romania. Now, clearly that is going to make a number of people on the Moldovan side of the border unhappy.
Of course, and this is something that should be first and foremost discussed with our Moldovan neighbors rather than inside Romania. No, there was a Russian-backed narrative for more than a decade now that supported the reunification of Romania and Moldova in preparation of an international justification of reunification of historical territories as they were preparing to invade Ukraine. It is part of the revisionist agenda that the Russian administration has promoted in its foreign policy. And I think there is much to be said with regards to how any type of rapprochement legally between Romania and Moldova could unfold, but essentially that will only be done within the European Union as member states of the European Union. This is the path that the Moldovan people choose and the Moldovan government is pursuing, and it can amount to a de facto integration, economic and from other perspectives, but it will be within the European Union and not as an annexation of any sort.
Clara, we're talking as if George Simion has got this election in the bag. Of course, he hasn't. There is another candidate. May the 18th will be the runoff. Nicos Sedan, does he have a chance? Do you think he could actually upset the predictions?
I think the level of votes and support that George Simion has managed to rally in this first round makes him a very likely winner. If the difference would have been smaller, I think there was a chance to test the maturity of the pro-European parties and rally behind Nicos Jordan. Nevertheless, it is still not too late. We basically see the same scenario as in the cancelled elections in the fall, where the finale is being led by a nationalist sovereignist contender on the first position and a progressive independent or a progressive leader on the second position. And then, as of now, we do want to see political parties rallying behind a pro-European candidate if they manage to do so. But it will not be only up to the parties, it is also up to the voters to choose their leader. And also, I think the Socio-Democratic Party will play a very big role as still the biggest parliamentary party. And should they choose to support George Simion as well, that will create a very large advantage still to George Simion. So a lot is to be said on how the mainstream parties will align themselves with either of the two candidates.
Clara, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Clara Volintiru in Bucharest, the Regional Director of the Black Sea Trust of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thanks again, mulțumesc, and we'll watch to see what happens in the second round, which is scheduled for May the 18th. And thanks again.